Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominic and Bryan.
Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to point you to an awesome set of resources that we have on doinnerwork.com that are free for download. One of the things that Bryan and I get asked all the time are our book recommendations, including summaries of the books that we've talked about on our podcast. And you can go and access those at doinnerwork.com/books. doinnerwork.com/books. We have 3 different lists that are available for download. Number 1 is 12 books that every man must read, which is a curated list of books that have become the most important works of my life and in Bryan's life. 18 books that every business leader must read. And those are all about productivity and performance and how to have peace of mind. And then also a list of 15 books written by women that we love in order for you to deepen your perspective and better your understanding of the worldview and experiences of a woman. So head on over to doinnerwork.com/books and get your free downloads. Today's episode is specifically for you fathers out there, because as it turns out, many of you listeners are fathers, and many of the women who listen are mothers who have a man in their lives that they care about, whether it's their partner or husband. And Bryan and I oftentimes find ourselves limited in our ability to support you because neither of us have been married or have kids in our lives, even though we aspire to have those things. So it's really important for us to go out and scour the universe to find out who is a top-notch resource that we could bring to you. And we found him. Larry Hagner is a man that I've gotten to know over this past year through his incredible work with The Good Dad Project, which is something that he founded. Larry is a humble man who would consider himself to be an average guy, and I would consider him to be doing extraordinary things. He's brought a community of men together, fathers who just want to learn how to do it better. Many of us have examples and role models of what fathers could look like or have looked like, but we don't necessarily have a model for what really good looks like. And so his community of men focus on 5 things: nailing your finances, being optimized in your health, building a legendary marriage and or partnership with your significant other, having an epic connection with your kids, and being a leader in business. Larry himself has been married for over 16 years. He has 4 boys under the age of 13. He's accumulated 5,000 hours of coaching with the men in his community. And he considers himself to still be a student and not an expert. And you'll hear that in the humility with which he talks. Larry runs a highly successful podcast. I've got podcast envy, called the Dad Edge podcast. It's got well over 1 million views. He's interviewed some heavy hitters like Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL, Cal Newport, the New York Times bestseller on productivity. And for you Yankee fans out there, Todd Stottlemyre, who was the pitching coach under Joe Torre during that legendary reign of Yankees World Series, if you can remember that fucking far back. It's been quite a while. I'm a Yankee fan. That's another conversation for another day. In this conversation today, Larry will tell you why the 5 love languages is not just for your partner, but it's also really important for your kids. He will talk about why rites of passage are extremely important for raising young boys, and how he talks about one of the recent examples, the most extreme thing he's ever done with one of his sons in the name of a rites of passage. And that story will bring a tear to your eye. And he will also open up the kimono to how in the first 8 years of his 16-year marriage, he wasn't having the kind of connection, romance, or sex that he wanted, and how that's pretty normal for many of the men in his community, and how the last 8 years have been like gasoline on a fire. He's figured out how to learn his wife's love language, what causes her to fire in her life, and how you can curate that in yours. For the fathers, this is your episode. For the mothers who have a man that you care about, this is one for you too. And for those of you who are aspiring fathers like Bryan and I, we found this to be extremely useful as well. Enjoy today's conversation with the Good Dad Project's Larry Hagner.
I started this as a struggling father, still a struggling father. It's such a humbling job, but my childhood was spent, half of it was spent without a father figure. And then the other half was spent with several variations and several individuals of what I would call toxic fatherhood. My mom was always in and out of marriages. She was married 3 times. My biological father left when I was really little, reconnected with him once when I was 12 as a fluke. We connected for a few months. He left. We parted ways again. I ran into him when I was 30. So last year, kidding. It was 13 years ago. I ran into him again as a total fluke in a coffee shop here in St. Louis, which was pretty darn fascinating. For the past 14 years, we've had a relationship, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, the way I was raised, I learned what not to do as a father. Like that was my template, but I didn't know what good looked like. And then when I was 30, I had my first son. I have 4 boys now. And to quote a joke from Jim Gaffigan, if you ever want to know what it's like to have 4 kids, just imagine that you're drowning and someone hands you a baby. It's insanity. It's like having drunk people in your house that never leave.
I love Jim Gaffigan, man, so you can keep coming with that stuff.
Oh my God, dude. If I could tell you how many times my 3 and 5-year-old have just shown up to the dinner table without pants on, just thinking it's the normal thing. I'm just like, it's the behavior of drunk people, but that is my house. It is highly entertaining and it's nails down the chalkboard all at the same time. It's really, really what it is. It's the best way I can describe it. And raising, especially boys with high energy, 13, 11, 5, and 3. My story is I didn't know what good looked like. And I think most men are in that. I've interacted with, I actually added up the amount of hours that I've interacted with men over the years, coaching or masterminds or whatever. And it's well over 5,000 hours at this point. And what I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, most men have some sort of wound from their parents. My kids are going to have wounds without a doubt, but we all kind of have these wounds. I can count on one hand how many guys have been like, I had an awesome childhood. My parents had it all together. It was awesome. So I knew what not to do because I kind of had the other extreme of that, but I didn't know what good looked like. What we're doing in the mastermind is we're helping men understand what good looks like. And we're doing that through shared experiences and through community and through content that we teach every single week, every single month. And men thrive in what we call the 5 dimensions. The 5 dimensions are mastering your finances, mastering your health. And health is just not physical. It's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever that means to you as an individual. Having what we call a legendary marriage or a legendary relationship with your significant other, having an epic connection with your kids, and being a leader in your business. That's the sweet spot for men. That's really what we do. And the why really came out of absolute struggle. Here's what I'll tell you about men. And this is, you guys will understand this. And as your audience listens to this, it's men and women both, I think. We're keenly aware what our weaknesses are. Like we're always trying to improve. I just had Gary John Bishop, who wrote the book on F Yourself. I don't know if this show is clean or not.
Larry wants to know if this show is clean. For those of you who've listened to us before, you know how funny that is. Quick side note, the reason why I'm doing this mini interruption here is because your boy was a dummy when setting up the audio recording for the podcast. I set the wrong setting. Our audio quality was horrific. So instead of subjecting you to that, we're editing that out and I'm doing these little interruptions like this. Trust me, it's much less painful on your ears this way.
So he wrote the book on Fuck Yourself, but he talks about, if you look at the history of humans as a species, we're always trying to improve. We're always trying to up constantly. Like people used to think running a mile in 4 minutes was unheard of. And now, we've crushed that. We evolve into a better, a more evolved species all the time. So men are keenly aware of like, oh, I'm just terrible at my finances. I need to be better at that. Oh, I'm overweight. I need to be better at that. My marriage kind of sucks. I need to be better at that. I'm not the best parent. I need to be better at that. And I suck at business. I need to be better at that. What I always tell men is you're keenly aware of what it is you need to work on. And that's usually what sparks the interest of a guy coming to join us. But what I do when I get to know the guys, it's a strength finder opportunity. Like, hey, as much as you might be hurting in your health, what's the marriage look like with you and your wife? Oh, we're actually really good. We intimacy is there. Communication's there. Like, we're great, man. I love her to death. I was like, okay, do you know how many men can't say that? And you didn't get there by accident. So you're doing something right to do that. My question to you is, what are you doing? So it's more of a strength finder. So yes, I always see men like they want to come and do life with us because they want to go to work on 1 or 2 things, but they also become keenly aware of what it is that they're good at, because men are good at things. We just are usually oblivious to it.
One of the things that you fathers have confided in me in some private moments of reflection is how lonely fatherhood can feel at times. despite all the chaos in the household or maybe the number of people that you engage with in your work environment, it can still feel like an isolated, lonely existence. And even the admission of that feeling of loneliness can feel like a failure or feel like weakness. And some of the things that you've shared with me are how dramatically your relationship with your partner, your wife, has changed, especially after that first child, where much of her time, energy, and affection is going to nurturing the child. And yet your needs for attention or physical touch or sexual intimacy go unnoticed, and you don't know how to express it. It can be frustrating. And also, your stresses can go up, especially if you're not sleeping. And now there's like all this new responsibility in your life, and all the other responsibilities on your shoulders haven't gone down at all. And navigating that can be frustrating and confusing, and not knowing who to talk to about that can lead to these feelings of overwhelm and potential loneliness. And it's not cool, you think, to express that to anyone. Like, again, it feels like a failure or weakness. So I asked Larry the question of, do you find that many of the men who find you at the Good Dad Project come there with these feelings of loneliness?
Most people will tell you like, hey man, how's your day? Oh, it's good. How's work? Great. Fine. How's your wife? Oh, good. Everything's good. We're busy. Yeah. That's our answer for everything, right?
We know exactly what you're talking about.
The surface level status report.
Yeah, the surface level status report. And God forbid, like, can you imagine being like, hey man, like how's the family? Oh, me and Jessica, man, we're going through a really tough time right now. Like, we haven't had sex in a couple months, and we're not really communicating. We haven't been on a date night, and we're arguing a lot. How often does that happen? Like, hardly ever. God forbid we share that stuff, because if we do that, people might see that we might not have our act together. But you talk about the loneliness and the isolation. Men are constantly walking through some sort of crucible. I mean, people in general are just walking through some type of crucible at some point. There's always a villain, and there's always obviously something that's going well. So our premise and our default is to always share with people like everything's good and fine. Here's what it really does. It makes us feel more lonely, because it's like, I got to make sure everything looks okay on the surface. And then the other person that you're talking to, they're walking through something, and then they hear you say, oh yeah, life is good and great. Well, crap. Things are going great for them. It's obviously not going great for me, which makes that person that you're talking to feel even more alone and isolated. So we always say this, that authenticity is how we relate. For instance, if you and I didn't know each other, or even if we knew each other, there are people that I've coached football with, right, for the past couple of years, and it's always been that surface level relationship. There's one guy in particular that we've gotten to be really close friends. And the first time that guy actually sat down, and he's like, dude, my head is a freaking mess right now. My oldest son is kind of walking through some things with his eyes right now. My wife and I are worried sick about it. We're trying to manage everything else. Dude, that made me like that guy even more. Now I'm like, oh, so you're not superhuman. And that made me that much more comfortable to lean into him when I needed, which I just did the other day. It's really our authenticity that allows us to be relatable, not the highlights. Like, we can go on Instagram and see how everybody's balling, right? But that's not how real human beings really interact.
Back in April of 2017, Bryan went to his very first men's retreat, which was my men's retreat that I ran, called Design Your Future. And on the third and final day, Bryan was cracked wide open. He was a totally different guy. And he shared this reflection in the final moments of a belief that he'd been carrying around for 20 years that he just came to learn was bullshit. And it was a quote that his father had shared with him when he was a teenage boy, a quote from the legendary football coach Vince Lombardi, who said, half the people don't give a shit about the problems that you have, and the other half are happy that you have them. And the lesson that Bryan took from that over the next 2+ decades of his life was, if you have a problem, keep it to your fucking self. And so in the course of this conversation, Bryan brought that up because he said that limited him in his ability to get the proper support that he needed, or to give the men or the women in his life the chance to support him who would have wanted to, so that he could have broken through some of these obstacles and limitations. And he asked Larry if he felt that a lot of the men have that same belief system as well.
I think people have the wrong perception of being authentic. People view being authentic as being like a Debbie Downer, a negative Nelly, whatever you want to call it. That's not necessarily the case. One of the things we do in our masterminds during all of our sessions, half the session is dedicated to what we call peaks and valleys, because everyone is winning somewhere. Everyone's kicking ass somewhere. I don't care how bad some other portion of your life is going. And then in other areas, you need some help. You need a point in the right direction. There's something that's on your mind that's keeping you up at night. I'll tell you without a shadow of a doubt, my marriage is going great. Love my wife more than anything. We do, business is phenomenal, but I am ready to lose all the hair on my head because my 11-year-old is testing the hell out of me right now. And it's just driving me crazy. And as a parent, I feel overwhelmed. I feel defeated. I feel like I can't figure him out. I feel like I'm always on his case. I feel like I'm always course correcting. I'm always punishing him. And I feel like a total failure when it comes to that. So I can share with men like, hey man, here's where things are awesome. Here's where I'm struggling a little bit. And the cool thing is when we interact with people to that degree, perhaps you're talking to somebody who does really well with parenting and like, oh, I have an 11-year-old too. Maybe I can share a few insights with you that have helped me over the years. And then you're helping each other.
Can't have a conversation about fatherhood without talking about dad sex. Now, many of you have told us that there is a clear before and after sex life when it comes to having that first child, meaning your sex life was one way, child comes, and then your sex life is very different thereafter. Now, of course, there's the physical recovery time of your partner after birthing that child, but many of you have told us is that even after that physical recovery time, your sex life has never looked the same. Maybe she's just not as interested in sex anymore, it seems. Maybe you don't have the time because now you're caring for another human being and you can't find that alone time with one another. Maybe the things that you were doing in the past, she's no longer responding to. And it can be quite frustrating for you and you can feel helpless because you still have these needs that you want met, but you feel like you're growing further and further apart. So we asked Larry about what does a father do in that situation?
Every guy that I interact with, I'm under the assumption that, he's probably watching porn more than he wants to. Yeah,
great assumption. We believe.
Yeah. And I always tell guys this too, like when they come and do life with us, I was like, don't be surprised if porn comes up on these mastermind calls, because for us, it's like, it's freaking normal everyday talk and we don't judge anybody because we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. Everybody's guilty of it. We talk about porn as freely as like, oh, look, the sun's out. I looked at porn 15 minutes ago. Like, you know what I mean? Once you take the guilt and the blame and all that BS around it, right? I'm not saying it's a healthy thing, and I'm not here to debate whether it's healthy or unhealthy, but once you take that guilt and shame and isolation around it, it becomes just another thing that you can talk about and be free to talk about it without that judgment, without that shame, without that guilt. Once you remove that, the conversation gets a whole lot easier and strategy becomes a whole lot easier because you're like, I can deal with this if I don't feel so bad about it. If I'm in the shadows, makes me want to stay in the shadows more. But to answer your question about relationships and marriage and sex, early on in my marriage, I've been married for 16 years as of actually this month. Half our marriage, I think, was spent in the typical, the very, very typical. We weren't having sex nearly as much as I wanted to. And I felt like it was disconnected. It wasn't as great as I wanted it to be. And looking back on it, she probably felt the exact same way. And it wasn't until I really started learning. So like, I think being open and being a student of like, hey, how can I do this better? And I'm not just talking about the act, like how can I interact with my wife better? How can we communicate better? How can I love her in the way she feels so loved and so appreciated that she wants to have sex with me more, that she craves me because I know the keys to unlock that. I swear, I think I might have mentioned this on the show that you came on, but I say it on the podcast quite a bit. I think every jeweler worldwide who sells engagement rings should give you the book, The 5 Love Languages. Once you buy your ring, here's your book. Boom. Because I think a lot of marriages would be saved. Scary statistic here for you guys. 50% of the US marriages end in divorce. We know that. But here's the other scary thing. A third of the marriages that stay together are so unhappy and so miserable, but they won't break up for financial reasons or for the kids or for whoever else, but they're roommates, they're circling in different orbits. That's a third of the marriages that stay together. Another 1/3 of the marriages that stay together are like, it's all right. I don't really want to break up. Probably something better out there for me, but they're disengaged. And then the other 1/3 is they're thrivingly happy. That's only 1/3 of marriages that stay together that are actually happy. So I share those statistics with you to give you some context that this is a problem. I think if you really understand what your wife's love language is and what your love language is. And as long as you can understand to communicate that intentionally, I'm physical touch, words of affirmation. So I want to hug and kiss my wife and I want to tell her how beautiful she is. But my wife is quality time and acts of service. So one of the greatest feelings of love that she gets is when I get her out of this house and away from these drunk boys to where she can go unwind and recharge with her girlfriends, which she is doing tonight. And she feels so loved and appreciated. And of course, this morning she comes into my office and she's like, thank you so much, like, for setting this up with my friends. And she's like all hugging on me, kissing on me. And I know what's going to happen when she gets home later on tonight. You know, it's on, right? So she knows I'm physical touch and words of affirmation, which that's not her thing. But she's like, I have to remind myself all the time to hug you and kiss you because that's what I know you need. That's the easy part. The more in-depth part is, and I'm going to coin some data from The Miracle Morning for Couples, which is written by Lance Salazar, Brandy Salazar, and Hal Elrod. There are 4 elements to a legendary marriage: self-care, partnership, friendship, and lovers. And I'll just go over those quickly. So self-care, taking care of yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally. Take care of yourself. Most people don't do that. Men, and I think this is so noble, but I think it's a miss. Most men will be like, I got to take care of the kids. I got to take care of the wife. I come last, which is extremely unselfish, but it's also extremely selfish. Because what's happening is you're giving your family the 20, 30, maybe 50% of the person, the version of you could be. If you invest time, energy, resources into constantly feeding yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally, you're going to become that 60, 70, 80%, 100% you that they really, truly want anyway. And so do you. My goal every day physically is to get out and move every day. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's a run, a CrossFit workout, whatever else. Mentally and emotionally, I have to dive into like one of our call teams in our mastermind group. I have to read something. I have to write something or journal something in order to get my mind right. That's a miss. You got to do that stuff. Yeah. So partnerships. Partnerships is more the business side of a relationship. So it's the finances, it's the appointments, it's the errands, it's the roles, it's the chores, it's all these things. That's where half of arguments all happen, is in that partnership standpoint, because that's where a lot of expectation is, a lot of unknown expectation is. So as long as you know who's doing what, who needs what, who's running this person to there, and all these other things, the more business, the more schedules and all that, kind of like the CFO and COO of the family. That's where that sweet spot is in partnerships. Friendship is, do we enjoy each other? At the end of the day, are we friends? Like, are we buddies? Can we go out and grab a beer together? Can we go do something together? Do we enjoy each other's company, or are we each other's fan club? That's friends. And then lovers is obviously what we try to do, is we try to skip usually over the first 3 and get right to lovers. And that's when both people, especially the wives, are like, I don't feel a connection to you. Like, why would we jump right into bed? So that's what we see a lot. I think that's where a lot of people are amiss. It's like, do I understand like what makes my woman fire? Do I really understand her triggers? You hit upon something right away, which is, so my love language is physical affection. And during the day, especially when the kids are around, like I'll come up behind my wife and put my hands around her hips and kind of give her a hug and a kiss. I would honestly say, without a shadow of a doubt, about 80% of the time I do that, I don't have an agenda. Like, I just want to be like, man, I love this girl. Like, I'm looking at her as she's doing whatever else, and I just want to go up to her and I appreciate you. I love you, and that kind of thing. The way she takes that is, oh, it's another guy, another man, another male in this home that needs something from me. Her expectation is, oh, he wants sex. Sometimes what I have to do, and it sounds unromantic, but it reassures her, like, I'll come up behind her, I'll put my hands on her hips, and I'll whisper in her ear and be like, I don't want a thing from you. I just want to love on you for a second. Just tell you I appreciate everything you do. Wow. And yeah, I mean, without doing that, she automatically thinks like I want something from her. And you're right. When they're in that mode of like, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, this kid needs this kid, you know, all these other things that are wearing on her mental space. Now she feels like she has something else. Her brain wasn't even there. Her mind wasn't even there. And I would challenge men and women who listen to your show, but I would challenge men that this is not something else you have to do. This is something you get to do. Because how cool is it that you get to learn and understand how your woman fires? Because I can tell you without a doubt that when I do that, my mode of like coming up behind her and loving on her on that 20% of the time where I do have an agenda, what I'm basically doing is talking her out of that agenda that I want. If I go up to her and be like, hey, I don't want a thing from you. I just want to tell you I love you and appreciate you. That usually will spark her to the agenda that I didn't even plan on, because she doesn't feel that pressure. She feels appreciated. She feels loved. And now she's thinking about it.
Larry and I are Facebook friends. I love following his posts because he shares his parenting techniques and stories real time that are quite provocative. And oftentimes he shares things that are somewhat controversial, and other parents weigh in on that. And it's a really healthy forum for debate. And there was a post that Larry put up recently that was quite provocative about a rite of passage that he invited his son to participate in, that he would call the single most extreme thing that he's ever done with one of his sons. And I asked him about it.
This might actually be the controversial thing, right? I'm kind of big on getting my kids outside their comfort zone, which I think is important. I'm not stupid about it, but I would say this was probably the most extreme thing I've ever done. So my boys, again, they're 11 and 13. And I just concluded what we call the Dad Edge Alliance Elevation Mastermind. And that's our highest end mastermind. And what that is we take 10 men through a 6-month mastermind, die-hard curriculum, die-hard accountability around the 5 dimensions. What men really get out of that is a flourishing relationship with their wives, wonderful relationship with their kids, while also increasing and improving their businesses. Also included in that is a retreat, an in-person retreat for 3 days in Breckenridge, Colorado. We got this sick, massive house that sleeps 14 people in the mountains. It looked like it should have been on cribs. Like the photos that when I rented this place, I was like, and we walked in, I was like, wow, this is insane. Well, here's what I did. We had 2 guys in the mastermind that could not make the trip. They had other prior commitments, so they couldn't make it. So we actually had like 4 leftover beds. I brought my kids, I brought my sons, and I discerned about this. And I was like, I'm going to host this retreat. I'm also going to use this as a rite of passage for my kids, because they're right at that young boy to young manhood. And so what I did was, part of the retreat was we summit a 14er. The 14er was Mount Quandary, which is 14,265 feet, nearly 12-hour round trip hike. It's no joke. It's a bit of a, and there was a part of me that was just like, wow, this could be interesting. I knew my sons could make it. Well, what happened on the day of the climb was my 13-year-old had altitude sickness and could not make the climb. I'll tell you a quick story after I get done with this one of what we're going to do about that. So he stayed back. He was really upset about it. My 11-year-old, he made it. So it was 11 and a half hours. I'll share a couple of stories. 4.5 hours in, he was carrying a camelback and his pack full of food and some water. So he's carrying, 15 pounds on his back. And I knew he was getting wobbly. His legs were getting wobbly. He was getting tired. The altitude was getting to him. And he's a tough kid, super competitive athlete. And I was like, hey, man, I can tell you're getting tired. We've got a ways to go. Give me your backpack. And we were with 10 other guys. And he's like, no. And I'm like, yes, give me your backpack. And he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So we argued, got in his face. And I said, as your father, give me that pack now. So he took it off reluctantly. I put my camelback back on, his backpack and my backpack. So at this point, I'm carrying like 40 pounds. And I put my arm around him and I'm like, look, man, there's no shame in this. As you've seen on my podcast, I've interviewed some of the most elite, like Navy SEALs and operators and that kind of thing. These guys don't perform by themselves. They perform as a team. When one man starts to get tired, they pick up the slack. I'm picking up the slack for you. And I was like, you know what? Who knows? You might need to help me on this trip. And I kind of laughed internally at myself. I'm like, man, that will happen. So then we summit to the top. We made it there in 7 hours. I read him a note, a rite of passage, and it was 5 pages long. I'll just give you the 30,000 foot view. But I basically explained what a rite of passage was and basically said rite of passages have been around for centuries. And a rite of passage is when you experience something that takes work and then is celebrated after completion. And then I read him this entire letter. Basically what it had in this letter was the pillars of becoming a man. One pillar was truth and honesty. Why as men, we always need to stand within truth and honesty. Another pillar was stand up for what you believe in, even if it goes against the crowd. Stand up for what you believe in. The women in your life, that was another pillar. Why you treat women with respect. Why you treat their parents with respect because you are dating their daughter. And at the same token, don't stand for a woman that treats you terribly because there are women out there like that. Managing money was another pillar where we talked about saving your money, being a good steward of your money, and learning the skills to be financially free by the time he's 30. Friendships was another one. I explained to him the different levels of friendship in our life, the acquaintances, the ones that are deep, and the iron sharpens iron. You can lean into men. They're not going to baby you. They're not going to enable you, and they're going to challenge you, but in a very empathetic and encouraging way. Leadership was one, doing things right the first time. And as I read him this 5-page letter, he was sobbing at the end of this. And I was too. It was incredibly emotional. Well, here's the crazy part about the way down. So we started the trek down, 4.5, 5-hour trip down. I view myself as a pretty fit guy. I've been in the gym for 25 years. My left leg cramped up, my quad. And it wasn't like, a little twinge. It cramped, fired. I was like, oh, that's not good. So I stretched it out. And I didn't want to show him how bad I was kind of panicking. I was like, oh my God, like, I hope this doesn't happen. There's no way I'm getting down this mountain if my legs can't move. So 10 minutes later, it happens again. 10 minutes later, it happened to both. And at this point, I'm like on the ground. I'm trying to stretch out my hip flexors. He was like, are you all right? Are you all right? Now, luckily, we also had 10 of the guys with us. I slammed 50 ounces of Gatorade. I ate 2 packets of beef jerky because I need electrolytes and potassium. He's like, Dad, take off your gear and stretch. So I took off my gear, stretching out. It took like 15 minutes, finally went away. I go to pick up my bag. Man, I go to pick up my bag. I'm like, where the hell's my bag? And I look on his back and he's wearing my backpack. This kid's got about 30 pounds on his back. Cause at that point we drank a lot of the water, but it was still like 30 pounds. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, I'm carrying your bag the rest of the way. I was like, no, you're not. So now I'm him on the way up. I'm like, no, I got this. And he looked at me and he pointed at my chest. He goes, you have my back. I got yours. I'm carrying this. Deal with it. And he just walked.
How fucking powerful is that story? You know, when Larry was sharing it in real time, I believe I had the single cinematic tear rolling down the right cheek of my face because of how moved I was by that story. Larry brought his son through a rite of passage, something that was a trial, an ordeal of some kind that his son had to push himself through limits and limitations. And then at the end of it was met with a way to process that through a wise elder who was Larry, right? Sharing with him the wisdom of what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be financially free, how it meant to treat women and to be treated by women. And so many young boys are missing that rite of passage of putting boyhood behind and stepping closer and closer into manhood. I know I wish I would have had an experience like that. And many of you fathers who are listening can now take cues from Larry on how to create some of those more intentional moments for your sons in your life and also your daughters as well, of course. And so I asked him what his relationship with his strong-willed 11-year-old son has been like since they got off the mountain.
Here's the funny thing that I'll tell you about strong-willed kids. As much as he drives me crazy, I know that's a gift, right? CEOs are not yes men. Someone who gets used and abused by women are not yes men. I applaud and hate how strong-willed he is, but I've seen him like... He was dating, he's in 6th grade. He was dating a girl. That means nothing in 6th grade. It's a label, right? But he was dating a girl. She's the most beautiful girl in his class. And I don't say that to be braggadocious. I say that because of the story I'll tell you guys quickly. I went to lunch with him and his friends. Like, I showed up to his school, surprised him with Jimmy John's, and we were sitting there. All of his friends were like, dude, like, how did you get Jada to like you, man? Like, how did you do it? And he's like, I don't know. Like, I'm myself. I don't know. Like, and I saw this girl like staring at him from across the cafeteria and all this stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, this cracks me up. Well, a couple of weeks later, just recently, he comes home. He's like, me and Jada broke up. I was like, well, who broke up with who? He's like, I broke up with her. I'm sitting here thinking like, wow, she's known as the prettiest girl, most athletic girl in class. I was like, what happened? He goes, she kicked my friend in the balls at recess. And I was like, oh, did that bother you? And this is what he said. He goes, I don't need that in my life. So I love that about him.
It's a real strong boundary for him.
So I love that about him. But to answer your question, like, we're definitely more bonded. What I've learned about him is one of his love languages is words of affirmation. So he took that letter and framed it on his wall along with a photo of us at the top of Mount Quandary. So it's been something that when I do course correct with him, I have that sort of foundation to go back to, like, hey man, truth and honesty, right? We talked about that as one of the pillars of being a man. Let's do that, right? What's the real truth here? What do you want to tell me? That's been a foundation now that I feel that we've created.
Well, it sounded like Larry had an amazing time on the journey, but Bryan wanted to know, how did the boys feel about the experience?
I wanted them to have the rite of passage, but I wanted them to witness an immersion event where real men get together and talk about real things. Because as he moves through his life, I think he'll have that foundation of like, okay, does this relationship represent what I saw? And as far as like the rite of passage, I don't think that will truly hit him until he's older. He'll have that to look back on. The other thing that I didn't share early on was my 13-year-old has been beating himself up that he couldn't make the trip. So we're actually going back in 2 weeks. We're going to Summit of 14er. It's a bit easier, a lot easier. I think it's more geared towards him because Quandary is no joke. We're going to take a hike. I think it's going to be maybe 5 hours round trip. We're going to summit Mount Bierstadt. I'm going to read the letter to him on the top of that, bring him back down.
I was curious about some of the men that Larry has worked with over a longer period of time. If you could share some of the stories, the transformation stories of men who came in struggling in one area of their life and the journey that they took to the other side and how they're performing today.
And this man will remain unnamed for confidentiality. And for a while there, he not only came to us and did life with us, but he became one of our team leads. Unfortunately, he took a job a few months ago and had to step down as a team lead. The job didn't coincide with the call team time, but he's still a member of our group. So this individual filled out an application. We got on a call, and I have been blessed and honored to hear the story of so many men. And it always amazes me how authentic men will get very quickly with what's going on when we get on face-to-face calls. This guy was suicidal and was on the verge of divorce. All kinds of financial issues were going on. I feel like I'm giving out too much detail. He had more than 2 kids, I'll put it that way. If I give out the number of kids, it might expose this person. And he was in a world of hurt. And he said, I'm at that point where I feel like I'm making a plan. And when a man tells you that, you know that plan will come to fruition if there's not something. And I'm not saying I am not qualified to handle that. So I told him, I'm like, look, first of all, I think you need help beyond what we can give you. If you're going to do life with us, that's fine. But I also encourage you to get some professional help. And he did. But this person, within a matter of 2 months, joined our higher, more elite level mastermind, which he couldn't even afford, but he did it anyway. He went on a 6-month journey in that elite level mastermind. And I saw that man turn his marriage from literally ground zero to, I wouldn't call it thriving, but on a scale of 1 to 10, it was probably 7.5, 8. They were talking again. They were dating again. They were having sex again. He had a smile on his face when he got on calls. Like you could tell it was going well. He paid off just under $10,000 in debt, had much more patience. His wife ended up taking a position that allowed him to take a hiatus from his job. And that's why he became a team lead. But he completely and totally changed and out of the 5 dimensions, finances, relationship with his wife, his kid, and I guess you could also say health, because his mental health was compromised, completely turned around. And but yeah, that was definitely one other example. And then another individual, kind of the same thing, where he was to the point where his marriage was in ruins. He actually made a phone call to his life insurance company asking what his coverage was, and he is completely turned his life around as well. And I'm going to leave what he does in the Alliance out as well, because he's in a leadership position as well, but has completely and totally revamped everything in his life too.
Wow. As you can hear, Larry is doing extraordinary work with these transformation stories of the men in his community. But I also want to pause and talk to you. If you're one of the guys who's saying, yeah, but my life isn't in shambles. I'm not in debt. I'm not thinking about taking my life. It's not that drastic or extreme. Let me be very clear. Many of the men that are in Larry's community are super high performing guys, world-renowned athletes, 7-figure business owners, people who are change agents in their community. So there's a wide swath of men that come there, and also they drop their judgment of where someone else is at, because oftentimes you can learn the most from the men who are struggling in other areas, because it actually starts to illuminate the areas where you're bullshitting yourself. And I can say that from my own perspective and my life experience, specifically I remember walking into Sex Addicts Anonymous thinking that I was good. Everyone else in the room was fucked up. And I'm this high-performing dude. I had a lot of judgment, put myself on a pedestal, and looked out over the crowd and said, okay, I've got this. Just give me the formula, the few techniques, and I'll be out of here in 60 days. What I needed to learn was humility and recognizing that there was strength in being able to come together with a group of men who've actually faced down some of their biggest demons. And I've learned to respect the men who can speak openly to that, who have gone to the edge and who have come back with power. So for that guy, if you're that guy who's been listening and just kind of dismissing because of those two stories that he shared with guys who were on the edge, you're thinking about it all the wrong way, my friends.
I don't know if you guys know who Frankie Edgar is, but Frankie Edgar is a former lightweight champion in the UFC. I'm honored and humbled to say that I have a relationship with this guy. He's been on the podcast twice. We text here and there. But you look at somebody like that who's operating at like that elite professional level. But he was just in UFC 239 like about a month ago. And he unfortunately lost by decision. And the first thing he did was carry one of his sons out, as he walked out. And I sent him a card in the mail and with a photo of that and just saying, you might have lost the battle, but do you have any idea the war that you're winning? Your kids get to see you in a quote unquote, what we would all deem as a low point. Seeing that for you on your Instagram, that's a high. That's a win. That's where you walk out with your head held high and your kids get to see that. But the answer to that is we're all locked arms. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Jocko. I don't care if you're Frankie, Todd Stottlemyre. We all are locked in arms when it comes to what we want, our goals and our vision and our struggles when it comes to fatherhood and when it comes to marriage and when it comes to all these other things. And no man is better than any other. And we all can learn a thing or two from each other.
Before we put a bow on this conversation with Larry and he gives you all the ways that you can reach out to him personally and find him online, I wanted to remind you of all the resources that you have available to you at doinnerwork.com and the free book lists that we have available for download at doinnerwork.com/books.
Everything we do is at gooddadproject.com. The largest landing page probably is gooddadproject.com/podcast. That's like our arsenal of podcasts. We have well over 450 podcasts that are out there now. We have all kinds of resources on there that are for free. If you want to better connect with your wife, there's a resource on there for you for that. Better connection with your kids, there's a resource for you for that as well. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, get just weekly updates on what we're doing, who we're interviewing, you can do that. As far as the alliance goes, it's very simple. The process for that is men fill out an application to be a part of what we do. The reason I do that is because I want to get to know this man before I talk to him. And it's 6 questions. It's 6 easy questions. But it allows me to get to know the man and what he's all about. And then after that, what I do, I think this always kind of surprises guys. I schedule one-on-one calls with them. They'll pop on. They're like, well, I thought it was going to be like somebody else, like one of your coaches that work for you. I didn't know I was going to be able to talk to you. And I don't say that in the wrong way, but I'm like, no, this is super important that we get to know each other because I want to get to know you and what you're all about and why you want to do life with us. And so we do that. If it's a good fit, there have been men I turn away because I'm like, dude, of course we want you to come and do life, but I don't think you'd get a lot out of what it is you need. So there might be certain degrees of things that men are going through that maybe I'm like, wow, you need something more than what we do. I want to make sure we're allowing the humble, hungry men in. We have no room for egos. And when I say egos, when a guy is really walking through a crucible in his life, like maybe his marriage, and another guy pipes up on a mastermind call and says, you need to man up, grow a set of balls, do this, do that. That's terrible advice. I'm proud to say we've never had that in our community. And I think a lot of that is because we get to know the guys. But yeah, get to know me and get to know them. And then if it's a good fit, they come on, do life with us. And then if men just want to dip their toe in and have better conversations via social media, we have a Facebook group called The Dad Edge, Real Dads with Purpose. We got thousands of guys over there. And proud to say that, man, the conversations these guys have is unreal. And it's just a Facebook forum. These guys will get super authentic even on Facebook and ask questions. So it's pretty cool. Those are ways guys can connect.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.